The northern rim of the Alps is a craggy limestone range, an ancient petrified sea floor that has been folded, broken and lifted sky high by titanic forces. For millions of years, water has shaped this rock, and for thousands, much of it has been hidden under lush vegetation. The mountain forests of Upper Austria make up the largest woodland area of one of Europe's most densely wooded countries. These forests are full of life and history. Much of what men have found and built here in times past has been forgotten and fallen to ruin. Nature has silently regained lost territory where furnaces and foundries once fired a thriving industry. That iron era is still echoed in myth and memory as wild woods draw a veil over the land of iron. Even in summer, the woodland between the rivers Steyr and Enns is among the most solitary regions of Central Europe. But in winter, when the migrating birds have deserted the mountains and every path has vanished under feet of snow, the land is shrouded in almost total silence. The pygmy owl is one of the few who hold out all winter. It hunts even in broad daylight small songbirds who also spend the winter in the mountain forest, like chaffinches or great tits. These birds live on the fruits of the forest, just like the red squirrel. The masses of snow that fall along the north rim of the Alps tax the hardiness of the wildlife more than the actual cold. Here, the chamois cannot count on winter pastures on wind-swept grassy ridges, like in the high Central Alps. The towering, windy limestone crags are free of snow, but offer little in the way of food. Not on the prowl for prey, this male lynx is looking for a partner. It's the mating season, and now the calls of this otherwise secretive cat echo through the forest. Practically extinct for almost a century, the lynx is seen once more from time to time in the Alps. When forests are allowed to grow wild, there is hope that Europe's largest cat might come back to stay. Lynxes are quite particular about their habitat. They look for large ancient forests with both conifers and hardwoods. They need sufficient prey and, especially in the case of this male, a chance to find a partner. When the sun's first rays brighten the forest valleys, it's hard to say whether this is late winter or early spring, until a loud and sudden answer wells up from the deep. All winter, the numerous karst springs in the canyons lie dry and still. But as soon as the snow up on the high slopes begins to melt, the waters come gushing from the lower outlets of elaborate cave systems. In the karst, rivers do not begin as small creeks. They start big. A female salamander has just released her larvae into the icy water. Salamanders are born with gills. After a few weeks, they leave the water with fully developed lungs. In the damp, mossy limestone gullies, helix snails congregate in spring. These animals are hermaphrodites, male and female in one, so they can fertilize each other's eggs. As they mate, each penetrates the other's skin with a minute, sharp hook that holds them together for a slow dance that lasts for hours. When by mid-June the last snow has disappeared from the mountain tops, many of these powerful springs will run dry, but heavy summer rainstorms may make them flow again. For a few spring weeks, the forest floor is sprinkled with a wealth of flowers. They must blossom and bear fruit before the dark canopy of the beech forest shuts out the sunlight. In the course of the warm season, botanical gems like this rare orchid gleam briefly on the forest floor. For more than 50 generations, the fate of this landscape, its woods and rivers, and of its inhabitants, was closely tied to a mystic mountain. Layer by layer, gallery by gallery, thousands of miners dug out the ore from this iron mountain, and the iron brought work to thousands more. For centuries, the fiery smoke of molten iron filled the valleys around the Iron Mountain. This was the cradle and heartland of the Habsburg Empire's heavy industry. From the Middle Ages until this century, the rivers were lined with furnaces and iron mills. In periods of peace, steel tools were exported from here to far beyond Austria's borders. In times of war, entire armies were supplied with weapons from here. For generations, the powerful beat of iron hammers set the region's rhythm. Men were shaping iron, but the iron also shaped the people and the landscape. Part of the limestone Alps is literally called the Scythe Range, after the numerous scythe mills, whose hunger for charcoal greatly affected the forests. Until the 19th century, wood was as essential for iron making as the ore itself. The furnaces were fired with enormous amounts of charcoal that came from the mountain forests. Although total exploitation was finally prevented by law, natural woodland all but disappeared and was replaced by man-made forests. "10 million trees now grow in the area of Limestone National Park. For the greater part, this sea of green is a patchwork of man-made forests, some of them quite old. Most of these mountainsides and valleys were and reforested as early as the Middle Ages. But in the labyrinth of pathless canyons and gulches, there are still islands of wild forest, as wild today as they were 1,000 years ago. A wealth of plant and animal life has survived in such places, and from here, many species are spreading out again. During the mating season, capercaillies need forests with tall, old trees and little or no underbrush. A fighting arena requires clear space. The hens watch the males fight. Each hen chooses just one partner from among the rivals, and the more victories he has won, the better. After mating, the hens retreat to areas where they can find cover and food in order to build a well-hidden nest on the ground and hatch their chicks. The monotony of man-made forests hardly meets the complex needs of these large birds. They can only thrive where the forest is in a fairly natural state. Paradoxically, the clearest indication of a living forest is its dead wood. In fact, a dead tree seems to be much more alive than a living one, for after its death, it becomes home to a profusion of organisms. The white-backed woodpecker is one of the rarest birds in the Alps and in all of Europe. It gathers insect larvae for its young, and most of these insects live in dead wood. Only in natural forests do such insects, and the bird that feeds on them, find enough dead trees to survive. Woodpecker holes serve all kinds of animals as living space. The fat dormouse, for instance, is a frequent successor to a woodpecker's family. For many plants, dead wood on the forest floor is like a nursery. Very often, saplings of the dead tree's own kind will sprout here. Young spruces, for instance, grow best on moist, rotting timber that is being decomposed by fungi, lichens, and bacteria. Not only plants and fungi thrive on the forest floor. It's a paradise for shrews, with plenty of food and hiding places. The tiny common shrew is a voracious hunter which devours several times its own weight of insects every day. It needs to hunt day and night. Without food, it will starve in a few hours. The flat larva of a cardinal beetle lives under the bark of dead beech trees, hunting for wood-eating insects. When a white-backed woodpecker finds a dying tree, it chisels many holes into the trunk over the years. Such a tree may house several bird and mammal species at the same time. In forests with plenty of dead wood, the housing situation is a buyer's market. Yet for some real estate, the competition is especially hot. If dormice have nightmares, the bass drone of an approaching hornet is one of them. This young hornet queen is looking for a place to found a colony, and this hole looks just perfect. For a hostile takeover, there's no need to use one's sting. It's enough to have one, and for the victim to know it. Ten weeks later, in midsummer, a formidable hornet colony has established itself. The queen began alone to build a nest. All by herself, she laid some eggs and raised the first workers. These workers then extended the nest by several stories. The queen is larger than the workers by about a third. She lays eggs into the fresh cells. Sexless workers develop from the eggs. Only later in the year will there also be new queens capable of reproduction. The eggs hatch into larvae. Returning from their hunting flights, the workers bring home flies and other insects to feed to them. Anyone entering the nest must pass by a sentry. Before the larvae are fed, the flies must be chewed to pulp. As soon as the larvae are large enough, they cover their cells with webs and change into immobile pupae. The largest will emerge as queens. Whereas the queens will live through the winter and found new colonies in spring, the workers will die when the cold weather comes. Between their hunting flights, the workers gather building material. They need standing dead wood of a very particular consistency. The wood is chewed to pulp, mixed with saliva and applied in layers. Each hornet colony is a tiny paper factory. In late summer, the nest has reached its maximum size, approximately that of a soccer ball. It consists of several hundred cells neatly arranged in several stories. When on hot summer days the air in the nest becomes stale, the workers fan fresh air inside. They also carry in water and sprinkle it over the larvae. The outer shell of the nest can be opened for better ventilation and closed again as needed. These fascinating woodland insects are feared by many people, but unjustly so. They're very peaceful, and if a hornet that feels threatened should sting, the consequence is no worse than a bee's sting. Hornets are endangered in Europe because they have lost much of their natural habitat, the wild wood. Mighty old beech woods are like cathedrals, and they too have become rare. The female dormouse that could not stand its ground against a hornet colony was pregnant. It found a new home, a black woodpecker's burrow, and gave birth to a litter. At the age of 4 weeks, the little rodents roam about all night. During the day, they sleep as if drugged. Late spring snows often break large branches off beech trees. On the fragrant broken surface, a veritable giant of a beetle has taken possession. It's a male Rosalia alpina, the very rare alpenbock, 4 centimeters long. He's not the only one around. His long antennae have registered the presence of another male. Like 2 knights in armor, the pair begin their duel. Sooner or later, the scent of the broken wood will also attract a female. Then each of the males would like to be alone to greet her. A female has landed, distinct from the males in that her antennae are shorter. The male spends no time on preliminaries and comes straight to the point. Another pair is also very busy, but their mating ground is ill chosen. Such an abundance of fresh wood must be paradise to alpenbock beetles. They need freshly broken beechwood to lay their eggs in. The charcoal burners, however, have different plans. Immediately after mating, the female searches for a small crack in the wood to lay an egg in. The larva will live inside the wood for 3 to 4 years until it develops into a mature beetle. Freshly cut beechwood, left to dry in the forest, is a treacherous and deadly trap for this once prolific but now endangered species, especially in tidy forests with little or no natural dead wood. Until the beginning of the 20th century, hundreds of charcoal kilns were constantly burning in Austrian forests. The burners lived in small huts way out in the woods to keep an eye on the fire day and night. Charcoal was much easier to transport from remote mountain forests than beechwood. Until the iron industry started to use mineral coal, the demand for charcoal was enormous and ate away at European forests at a frightening rate. The most precious landscape jewels of the Limestone National Park are well hidden away. Difficult to see even from the air, a labyrinth of narrow canyons cuts through the mountains. Only 2 decades ago, these picturesque canyons, 200 kilometers of wild rivers, were to be drowned in a giant hydroelectric reservoir. Today, they're protected and recognized as being among Austria's most beautiful natural scenery. When the bright midday sun floods the gorges with light, millions of mayflies dance above the water. They have risen from the bottom of the river and are flying upriver to mate. On such days, the yellow wagtail does not hunt on the river banks as usual, but in the air. This bird needs wild natural rivers to survive, just like the dipper. Both species find in these canyons all they need. Pure water, rivers with large rocks and gravel banks, plenty of water insects and shaded riverside rock walls where their nests are safe from predators and high water. Here, the wagtail and the dipper are next-door neighbors, their nests being only a few meters apart. The dipper's nest is spherical, artfully woven from moss under an overhanging rock. When the young dippers are 3 weeks old, their mother calls to them to make them leave the nest. The great jump into the world out there must be terrifying. It may take several days until the last of the nestlings can summon up enough courage to leave its shelter. Although the young dippers are able to swim before they can fly, they're hesitant to enter the water. As soon as the young have left the nest, the mother keeps diving in front of them, returning every time with fresh food and encouraging them to try it for themselves. A short distance downriver, where the valley widens and the banks are not as rocky, a pair of kingfishers has had a nest for many years. In contrast to the dipper, who searches the river bottom for insects, the kingfisher torpedoes fish from the air. Sometimes these birds hunt from mid-air. Mostly, however, they launch their attacks from branches. This pair has dug a nesting burrow about 1.5 meters long into the soft clay of a steep river bank. Immediately after feeding the young, the parents take a quick dip to clean their feathers, soiled in the narrow tunnel. Like the dipper, kingfishers often breed twice, sometimes even 3 times in a summer season. As the summer is short, the female may even lay eggs while the first nestlings are still being fed. For these birds, summer is not a time of recreation. Raising 5 hungry children is extremely stressful. Nevertheless, this dipper will start its next family in only a few days. Wagtails and dippers did not always have the rivers to themselves as they do today. For centuries, small and large rivers were highways for raw materials, wood and iron. Many large rafts would pass down the river ends every day. A river had to be big to carry rafts and ships, but millions of trees were cut in mountain areas miles away from the great rivers. In the narrow canyons, dams were built of timber and rock. Twice a year, in spring and in autumn, these dams were blown open to create artificially high water. Thousands of logs were washed through the canyons, many miles down to larger rivers. The lumberjacks had to avoid, by any means they could, logs jamming and blocking the flood. It was a dangerous job, and many lives were lost. No other region in the Austrian Alps has such an abundance of water as the northern limestone Alps, and no other region is as arid as their high plateaus. There is rain enough as heavy clouds from the Atlantic push against the northernmost barrier of the Alps. Yet, in spite of extreme amounts of precipitation, the higher regions of the limestone Alps are a moonscape, Central Europe's largest desert area. Limestone rock is so porous that all the rainwater immediately drains into the depths of the mountains. For large plant eaters like the chamois, this does not seem very inviting. However, the craggy ridges do offer them the seclusion and sense of security they need. In summer, chamois mothers and their young kids gather in large herds. Such kindergartens are only found in very remote, high places where they feel safe. The only threat here is from the air. Day after day, the golden eagle patrols the sky in search of a sick or wounded kid. As soon as he spots a kid that can't keep up with the herd, he will attack. The golden eagle hunts by surprise. It stands very little chance of snatching a kid from an attentive herd with many eyes constantly observing the sky. Alone with her kid, a mother will immediately lead it to cover when an eagle is near. "3,000 feet below the golden eagle, another large bird glides over the canopy of the beech forest. On a rock pillar high above the forest floor, but still in the shade of the canopy, a black stork, a shy and rare bird, has made its nest. Black storks have gradually extended their Eastern European habitat into Central Europe since the 30s and 40s. The parents hunt for frogs, fish and water insects within a radius of almost 10 miles. In contrast to many other birds, they do not feed their chicks individually, but empty the food from their large crop into the nest for the young birds to feed on. Unlike its white cousin, the black stork leads a secretive life and therefore needs large, undisturbed forests. Birds of this size take a long time to develop. After brooding the eggs for an entire month, the parents feed their young in the nest for 8 to 10 weeks. Only by the middle or end of August will the young birds learn to fly, and a few weeks later they set out on their long journey to Africa. Deep in the forests of the limestone Alps, ghost mines and remnants of ghost towns can still be found. Slow decay erases the memory of a once bustling industry, of settlements where 100 miners' families once lived, of river dams, bridges, mine shafts, and even cable cars. Nature is again filling the man-made gaps, but not everything that stirs in these ruins really belongs to the forest. The Aesculapian snake only moved into the forest after man had created large and numerous clearings and built settlements. These beautiful and harmless reptiles often lived and still live in and around human structures. Nor is the stone marten at home in the dense forest. Islands of human civilization lured this inhabitant of the rocky, timberless heights deep into the woodland. For decades, hardly a human footstep has disturbed the silence of such forgotten places. The forest is closing in on the relics, and it's only a question of time until the last of them will have disappeared. The stone marten is a hunter, and snakes are among his prey. This one would be an easy catch in spite of its size, but the marten does not know it. He's young and inexperienced. Bluff can save lives. The feigned attack and a cloud of pungent scent have alarmed the marten, just long enough for the snake to make an escape. To survive, the marten will have to learn fast. The very next encounter may end differently. The summer green of the beaches has lost its sheen. But before it all goes bleak, the forest burns in a final flare of colours that do full justice to the land of iron. On such crisp, clear autumn days, the chamois climb to the highest ridges. The bucks are now restless and aggressive, ready to discharge the energy saved up all summer. Storming towards a rival or standing defensively with lowered horns, they defend their mating grounds, chasing each other away from the females. Such conflicts often have a fatal outcome, with one of these otherwise expert climbers falling to his death. As each year comes to its end, it's time to draw up a balance. Year after year, the question is raised, what of the lynx? It is an unforgettable experience to hear a lynx's mating call when a male patrols the vast woodlands in late winter. The secretive hunter is sometimes heard but hardly ever seen. A track in the snow is a lucky find. Sometimes the remnants of a kill are discovered, sufficient evidence that the lynx has at least visited the area. Will he come to stay? Will he once more establish a territory in these mountain forests? Will the lynx be able to multiply? It takes at least 2 for a start. An idyll like this is almost too good to be true, yet it already exists elsewhere. So why not again in Limestone National Park, Austria's largest mountain forest? Here, the much persecuted cat is safe from hunters. More than that, the lynx's return would be most welcome. One spring, after 100 long years, the miracle no one would have thought possible a few years ago will surely happen. Not until then will we have proved that there is once more a place for wild animals in Central Europe. What would better symbolize nature's return than the lynx? And what better place to demonstrate our changing attitude towards nature than Limestone National Park, the wilderness that was once the Iron Forest.